Hey everyone, Amar here. In this video, we're going to be talking about the scariest part of the awakening journey, at least what's been the scariest for me up to now, and that is letting go of your identity, untangling from your ego. I think this is uncomfortable for most people, right? Because it's a massive shift from one state of being into a whole nother state of being. So I want to talk about why we need to do this, the importance of this, why it's so difficult, and more importantly, how you can do this, right, to help you along. Before we get into the video, I just want to say, if you are new to the channel, you like this sort of stuff, please consider subscribing. Also, check me out on Instagram if you're on there as well. But otherwise, without further ado, let's get into this video. So, the scariest part of the awakening journey. I actually want to link this video as a follow-on from my last video where I talked about the fear of rejection and how that fear is so deeply embedded within the human psyche, it controls so much of our lives, right? This follows on nicely from that video. So if you didn't see that video, I'll link it at the end of this one and maybe link it up here as well. So I think it's good if you watch that one as well, if you haven't already. But yeah, so let's talk about the identity, the ego identity. The ego identity develops mostly out of fear, right? Fear of rejection, fear of not being lovable, fear of not being accepted. As soon as we're born into the world, we begin to understand that it's a big world and I cannot survive in this world without other people, right? And so we begin to change our true selves, what we really are, in order to fit in, right? The earliest programming we get is from our parents, our caregivers. If you were lucky and you had good parents, then that early foundational programming will probably relatively healthy, which is good, which is what you want. If you didn't have healthy caregivers, then that stuff is probably not going to be very healthy. But at the end of the day, we're going to transcend all of it. So don't worry. I'm just trying to help you understand how the identity forms. So there's a good chance a lot of the basic parts of your personality and identity you got from your parents. So if there's things that you don't like about your parents, there's a good possibility you have them traits, right? You learned them very early on. We move on from that stage and we go into school and we become more social and we begin to understand, especially in schools, that you've got to be a certain type of person in order to fit in order for people to like you. Everybody wants to be popular in school, right? So you start to just become a certain type of person, you develop a certain type of identity, interests, things you like to do, and the type of friends that you like to have. And by the time you're like 17, 18, you've pretty much formed your basic identity, right? Now, most people, generally speaking, their identity will stay the same for most of their life, right? That's probably 99% of people, I guess. Maybe that number is decreasing as more of us evolve, but throughout human history, most people don't really evolve past that point, past the point of their basic identity being formed. Obviously, that's not us, because we're on a different path. And you probably, however you've come across spirituality, maybe you've had some awakenings yourself, or you've read some Eckhart Tolle books, or watched some videos, whatever, and you probably begin to understand that that identity you formed early on ain't really who you are, right? And like I said, you might understand that you developed that identity because you were afraid, right? You wanted to fit in, you wanted to be accepted, you didn't want to be rejected, right? It's a natural human impulse, like I talked about in the last video, to be a part of the tribe. But in this journey, it kind of works against us. So what I want to talk about here is how we can consciously work through these attachments we've created, right? I think some people might have what we call a dark night of the soul. That's when the realization hits you hard that you're not your identity. Some people, it hits them very hard and they can go into some deep, dark depression, the dark night of the soul, which takes them a long time to kind of move through. What I'm going to share with you here, you can do it more consciously. So you don't have to wait till you hit with some deep, dark depression, some deep realization. I mean, if that happens, obviously you're going to have to just find a way through it. But if you can start to consciously do this work before you reach some shocking, deep realization, then you will, like I said, be able to transition through it more smoothly. So the first thing you've got to do, and I'm going to talk more about this, is begin to see your own self-image, how you identify yourself, right? No one sees you the way that you see yourself. It's almost irrelevant how other people see you. What's important here is how you see yourself, right? Usually, we see ourselves either in a more positive light or in a more negative light. Both of them are relevant. So I just want to give you that question first. Just think about how you see yourself, and we'll revisit this. The next thing I want to talk about is how we form attachments to this identity. So if you consider your identity is one attachment, right? You've got an attachment to that self-image, right? That one attachment breaks down into smaller attachments. The smaller attachments are things you identify with, individual things. Let me give you an example. You might identify with your job, right? I've met people like this. They're so obsessed with their job that they think the whole world revolves around it. You might not be that attached to your job or identified with it, but you might identify with it a little bit. You probably do. Most of us do, right? You might identify with the relationships you have, right? The roles you play. Maybe you're a mother or you're a father. I've met people like this as well who are so obsessed and tied into that role, they don't see themselves as anything other than a parent or whatever, right? That's the most common one, the parent. Some people get so caught up in that identity. You've got passions, interests. Another popular one, the one I fell into when I was younger, was working out, right? I really used to go to the gym all the time. I fell in love with working out. I got obsessed with it. I thought everything was about working out. It was the only thing I cared about. So I formed a strong attachment to this identity of someone who goes to the gym and works out, right? It became everything to me. I know there's a lot of people out there like this, right? To take it on a deeper level, we identify with our race, with our gender, even as a human being, right? But these are much deeper levels. You don't need to go to that level yet. I just want you to identify the more surface layer attachments that you have, like the ones I've said, your passions, your interests. Maybe you like to dress a certain way. Maybe you like a certain type of music, or you follow certain types of people on social media. All of these things, right? These are creating a big part of your identity. So start to become aware of them, because whatever you have an attachment to, these things, you're actually giving your energy away to them. This is so important to understand. When you're able to relinquish the attachment, you reclaim yourself, right? You've given yourself away to the attachment, and now you think you're that thing. You think you are really that parent. You think you are really that job that you do. You're a doctor, you're a teacher, and you're so caught up in that role. That's what you think you are, because you've forgotten who you really are. You've given your power away to it. So as the attachments are released, you reclaim yourself, right? However, as you're probably going to find out, you're not going to want to let go of the attachments because you're so identified with them. And one of the biggest reasons you've formed these attachments to these identities is out of fear, right? Just linking it back to what I said, the fear of rejection, the fear of not being accepted. It makes us form identification with these things because we believe, at least the world tells us, if I'm this sort of person, right, I've got this sort of identity, people are going to like me, right? I'll be accepted. I won't be rejected. But as you're going to find out, you're giving your power away because it requires a great deal of energy to maintain that mask, to maintain that self-image. And furthermore, there's a lot of fear attached to these attachments. Because you took on the identities, the certain self-image out of fear, you're going to be afraid to let them go. To let them go is going to release some fear. The emotion of fear is underlying a lot of these attachments. But like I said, when you work through, you can integrate the fear. You actually grow, right? It's one of the coolest things. This is how you know it's working. This is how I stumbled across this. Because as I began to disidentify with things that I was overly attached to, I felt myself like growing, like I was reclaiming energy, right? I was becoming me. I didn't have to be any of that stuff to be accepted and loved, right? As you come back to yourself, you start to love yourself more, right? It's really cool. So this is why we have to do it, right? You become more conscious, more present when you stop giving your power away to this self-image that you created about yourself that isn't actually true or real. It's just a thought. So let's get into how to work through this stuff. To work through this stuff, there's a simple exercise I want to share with you. You need to make some notes, right? You need to make a list. You're going to make 2 lists. You can do this on your phone. I just do it on my phone and my notepad on my phone. You can do it in a journal or something, whatever you want to do. You want to make 2 lists. The first list you want to make is all the positive things you identify with, right? Like I said, all your passions, your interests, the things that you like, hobbies, maybe certain roles that you play in your life, all of these things that you positively identify with. Make a list of them. When you start to make the list, just save the document to your phone or whatever, so you can keep adding to it. Because when you begin to make the list, you'll start to see more and more things that you're identifying with, right? So make the list of all the positive things. Then you're going to make a list of all the negative things you're identifying with as well. This is so important. So obviously you have a self-image of all the good things about yourself, but you also have a negative self-image of all the things that you think you need to fix, right? Maybe you've got a bit of anxiety. Maybe you're not very good at interacting with people. Maybe you get depressed sometimes, or you've got some trauma you need to heal, right? These are, again, stories that we've created. I'm not saying we don't need to heal, because we've got a lot of this stuff is energetically and emotionally stored in our bodies. We need to do the work, but oftentimes we get attached to that. We identify with it, right? So also make a list of all the things that you think are negative about you, right? Because they still form your identity. Now, what we want to do is we want to start to let go, start with the positive stuff, right? This is the best way to do it. Because if you started with the negative stuff first, you wouldn't let go of the positive stuff, and it wouldn't work. The whole model collapses. So you can just sit in meditation and you can begin to just work on some of these attachments and just tell yourself that you're not that thing, right? You're not, like, if maybe you've got a gym obsession, right? That's not really who you are. I'm not saying stop going to the gym. Just don't be so obsessed with it. Anything you're overly obsessed with is a massive clue that it's an unhealthy attachment, and you're giving away massive amounts of energy to that thing, right? So pick something small. Maybe you like a certain type of music, right? Sit in meditation and imagine letting it go, right? Understand that that sort of music or whatever it is not really who you are. Eventually, you want to start working through these positive attachments you've got. When you think you've done enough, what you're going to find is a lot of the negative attachments will naturally fall away. Because if you're not the positive stuff, you can't possibly be the negative stuff either, right? This is what we call non-duality. And this is why you can't just keep hold of the positive stuff. This is the problem with traditional self-help. Most people, including me, this used to be me, just wanted to keep hold of the good stuff, but didn't want the bad stuff. If I could just have the good stuff without the bad stuff, I'm happy. It's not possible. If you want to have the good stuff, you're going to have the bad stuff. So this is the trade-off, right? You've got 2 choices. You can keep hold of the good stuff. You're going to have to hang on to the bad stuff. Or you can just let go of them both, right? And this is what I'm trying to direct you toward. Because letting go of both of them is what brings you back to yourself. You reclaim that energy, right? It's worth it. It's scary because you're not going to want to let go of all these things that you've identified with for so long, right? Because there's so much, like I said, so much fear underlying the attachments. But when you start to do it and that energy starts to come back to you, then that's when you'll start to believe it, right? You need to have the experience of you reclaiming the energy. And that'll give you like the confidence, the belief that, you know what, this is it. It gives you kind of a taste of freedom, and you'll keep following it. You keep following it, and you just keep letting go more and more. And like I said, the more the positive stuff you let go, naturally more of the negative stuff goes as well. And ultimately, it brings you back to yourself. Final point I want to make on this is, just because you break identification with things, it doesn't mean you have to stop doing them, right? Which might come as a relief for some of you. Let's use the gym example again. If you've been obsessed with going to the gym, right? All I'm saying is break the identification with it, you can still go to the gym. I think going to the gym is a great thing. I go to the gym all the time, and I used to be this obsessive person. It's not an obsession for me now. I go 3-4 times a week for less than an hour, and that's it. And then I forget about it. I don't watch YouTube videos about it all day long, or constantly thinking about what I'm going to eat. Like, it's too much. And that's who I used to be. That's what I used to do, right? But you can still enjoy the thing, right? I think what I currently do is I form loose attachments. That's the best way I can explain it. Loose attachments. So I can still enjoy the thing that I like to do, right? But it's more of a preference, right? It's just a preference. It's just something that I choose to do because I enjoy it, right? It's a preference. It's not some identification with it, some obsession where I'm thinking I have to get big or muscly because I want people to like me. Do you see the thing? Or I have to make a certain amount of money so people accept me and I get respect from people. Like, no, it's all wrong. You've got it all wrong. That's too much obsession with the thing. So it doesn't mean you cannot pursue your passions and interests. You just have a loose attachment. And if things don't go your way, guess what? It doesn't bother you as much. And I actually believe things will go your way more often because you won't be so attached to it, right? There'll be a lightness to the things that you do with your life, right? And so this is one of the scariest things you're going to do, right? On the journey, you're not going to want to let go of these things that you've identified with for so long. Eventually, when you let go of a lot of the surface layer identifications, you're going to drop deeper and deeper and start working on things like I said, your race, where you're born, your gender, even the possibility that you're a human being, right? It goes that deep. I'm not saying you have to go that deep right now, but you can have some powerful awakenings and come back to yourself just by letting go of the surface level stuff, right? So practice this, become more aware of this, make these 2 lists, positive things you identify with, negative things you're identifying with, and slowly start to work on letting them go, right? And watch what happens. Okay, so that is everything I've got to talk about in the video. If you have anything to add, any questions, comments, anything at all, hit me up down below. If you did enjoy the video, if you could please go ahead, give it a like, share, subscribe, really helps me out. Check out my book if you haven't already. I'll put a link down below. But until next time, remember to keep living free and being free. Peace.